Hi, friends. Today on the podcast, you will hear my interview with Nicole Cash, who transitioned from the highest levels of horn playing to being an audiobook narrator. Nicole Cash is a highly skilled performer whose training in classical music allows her to captivate audiences and connect people through the power of sound. She served as third horn with the Dallas Symphony and associate principal horn of the renowned San Francisco Symphony until she was diagnosed with focal dystonia, a career ending repetitive movement disorder. The meandering road of recovery and rediscovery led Nicole to the art of audiobook narration, to which she brings the same keen sense of rhythm, intonation, lyricism, and drama. Nicole delights in voicing the blood-curdling suspense of a dark thriller, the complex characters of literary and historical fiction, and the heartwarming nostalgia of a coming-of-age story. Her experiences as an African American woman compel her to share the tangled theories and truths of social science and political justice tomes. I was really excited to talk to Nicole on this podcast because I felt that for you, the listener, it is not only interesting to hear what entrepreneurial successes people are able to have within their music careers, but what kinds of interesting and artistic and creative fields a music career sets you up for. In my book, I set us up with a conversation about what would you do if you couldn't be a musician? What are some of the alternative careers you could imagine yourself in? And I wonder if audiobook narration might be one of them. Nicole's been a friend of mine for a long time, and she is an absolute artist in every field that she pursues. And I know that you will love this interview. Nicole Cash, welcome to Crushing Classical.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
I am so excited, and I think that our listeners are going to be so excited to hear about your journey from really like the highest level of professional musicianship into a complete new career and like how all of your skills transfer and like what you are up to now. But before I launch right into the middle of the conversation, will you please just introduce yourself to the listeners and tell a little bit of the story that brings us to where we are now?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Nicole Cash, and I am a former classical French horn player. I I most recently, well, in 2016, I had to retire from my position as associate principal horn in the San Francisco Symphony due to some playing struggles, and I was ultimately diagnosed with focal embouchure dystonia, which most musicians know is the boogeyman. No cure, no real treatment for an orchestral musician to continue playing in that capacity. So fast forward to, 9 years later, I am now working as an audiobook narrator and having the time of my life, to be honest.
That is fantastic. Um, the As I was thinking about this conversation, I find myself very curious because we musicians tend to think that like the work that we put in is all about, D flat minor scales and precision of attack and precision of like how exactly are we going to interpret this excerpt. There's very, very detailed, very focused work, and it seems untransferable. And yet I think about
Mhm.
the game of performing something that is audio only.
Mhm.
I think about the task of like shaping a phrase and
Mhm.
shaping a narrative almost, which is absolutely a musician thing. And I would love to know all about what this transition, what can you talk about your work now
Yes.
and what are some of the ways that you are able to use your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, honestly, you hit the nail on the head. And on a both a micro and a macro level, right? So on a macroscopic level, all the skills that we have as musicians, the discipline, the attention to detail, you know, it's all the putting in the time every single day. It's all transferable. I mean, really to anything, but to anything where, you have to produce something personal, something of your body, something of your own creation, right? So on a macroscopic level, the skills that we have to hone as musicians in order to find success as musicians are the same skills that one has to use for anything else. But on a microscopic level, you're absolutely right. You know, when you're thinking about, for example, performing an entire concerto, you're thinking about the arc of that piece, right? You're thinking about the large themes that get that come back, that get developed. You know, you're thinking about that overarching art, overwhelming arch over the whole piece, but you're also thinking about each phrase one at a time, even the shape of each note. Um, and audio books are exactly the same way. You want to think about the arc of the story, the arc of the characters, but you also want to think about, how am I phrasing, what's the arc of this paragraph? What is the
Mm.
arc of this sentence? What am I doing with this one word? You know, this one most important word of this sentence, you know? And those are choices. Those are all choices that we make as musicians, and those are choices that we make as narrators as well. It's exactly the same thing, really. And because I feel like as a musician, I even have a leg up over a lot of my colleagues as narrators are coming from the acting world, stage and screen, but they have their entire body. They have the space that they're working in to 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 hone their craft and hone their performance, right? We don't have our facial expression. We don't have our body language. We don't have anything visual as musicians, and as narrators, we only have how that sound is landing on our audience's ears. So it's there's just so many points of contact and points of relativity.
That's amazing. Um, when you're working on a concerto, you have the time and the space. Like you have all of the time you are able to make for it in your practice room, and you can think about it note by note and phrase by phrase.
Mhm.
But as an orchestral player, and I know I'm not telling you anything, I'm just naming this for the audience. As an orchestral player, you have a new program every single week, and
Yes.
that level of work, except for like the biggest, most important solos, is not what you're putting in.
Mhm.
What does that how does that relate as you're looking at like an entire novel? Are you pre-reading the entire thing? Are you like sculpting in your mind exactly how things are going to be shaped? Or
Yeah,
like
absolutely. And honestly, I hadn't even thought about it until you just said it, but that's another place where there's a huge similarity, because obviously I'm not working on the same book for months the way I would a concerto.
yeah.
You know, a working narrator is probably narrating a book a week, possibly more, depending on like how quick they can work or the length of the books, you know? So similarly, you know, you've got a program a week, you've got to be ready for that first rehearsal. So you prepare you listen, you prepare your part, and then you have to go in and get it done. And that's the same thing that we do as narrators. Yes, we pre-read the book. Yes, we're as I know everyone has their own process, but for me, I pre-read the book, obviously, and as I'm reading it, I'm looking for any verbiage that can give me clues about who these characters are and how they might
Mm,
behave and how they might present themselves, how they might sound. And again, looking to how do they change throughout the course of the book. Um, so I'm doing that beforehand so that when I do get into the booth or to that first rehearsal or whatever, and it's time to actually make the donuts, I'm
yeah.
ready.
Yeah.
And you know, I can get the work done in an effective way and hopefully a compelling way that resonates with listeners.
Yeah, like even as you're starting Beethoven 5 with that fate motif, you've got in mind that we're going to get to C major at the end.
Yeah, yeah,
Would be a
absolutely.
parallel. Yeah.
Absolutely, yep.
Oh, amazing. You mentioned characters, and that is not something that I had even thought of as I was thinking about this conversation. But over the course of a novel, you are not only in your own voice, I presume. You're speaking as Nicole the narrator, but you're also speaking as character 1, character 2, character
Right,
3.
that's right.
Is is that transferable from does that feel like something that is transferable from uh
Yeah, absolutely, and you know what, it's really pretty remarkable how much is transferable if you choose to think of it that way, and I do because obviously that's my background. You know, I did a book. My very first publisher audiobook that I did was a dual narration. So I had a male co-narrator who happens to be like one of the biggest names in the business. His name is Stephen J. Cohen. And when you do one of these books where you are narrating with a co-narrator, there's a point where you guys want to talk to each other and kind of discuss, make sure you're on the same page in terms of how you're, well, that you're pronouncing names and tricky words the same way, as that needs to be consistent, and that you're approaching the characters in the same way. And when he found out that I was a musician, he immediately gave me some invaluable advice. He was like, "Well, and when you're fleshing out your characters, think in terms of music. Think in terms of an instrument. So perhaps one character you're hearing a trombone timbre, and perhaps another character you're hearing as an oboe. So my trombone is going to be kind of lyrical and slidey and got some laid back. I always think of trombone players as being like the laid back goofballs of the brass section. And then maybe your oboe player is a little more uptight, and they've got a little bit more of a nasal color to them. Like it's so easily transferable, and personality wise too. You can think of, kind of, okay, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but maybe an egotistical trumpet player, and then you can have that kind of like, you know, that swagger in the way you present that character. Um, but yeah, and then you can also think along the lines of the style that you're playing, the style that you're speaking. Does this character kind of connect their words in a very legato way? Or are they kind of like, are they really a thoughtful person who maybe chooses their words and so they speak in a more detached way? So I don't know. I do. I think very musically when I'm fleshing out characters.
I mean, among the things that I love about what you just shared, your own versatility, because it was fascinating to hear all of those different voices come out of your same mouth. B, like, I actually love the I don't want this to come out in a non-contextualized way, but I love the idea that you can use the stereotypes of these instruments and of these families, and like we know these people in the
Yes.
orchestra world, and yet like every human is multifaceted and right, but the generalization is actually really helpful because you're reading a novel a week and you have to be able to like leap into this character and leap into this character.
Absolutely.
And
And the
yeah,
more I do this, the more I am realizing I'm pulling out from the same arsenal of characters and the same arsenal of colors and tools and approaches to different people, because they're any writer will say they've got their main characters who are very nuanced and specific, but then they've got their cast of trope characters, their cast of base characters that kind of you know occur in the world, in the wild, and everybody knows them.
yep.
Hmm.
100%. And I think about like in the orchestra when we're playing Mozart and we put on a different voice. We sort of put
Yes,
on our metaphorical powdered wig
absolutely.
and like be that character
Mhm,
for the
mhm,
duration of the symphony.
mhm.
And it's different from the character we put on if we're playing Bruckner.
Right, right, and I actually think of that's where I that's the comparison or the metaphor that I apply to genre. Okay, so you might be reading a horror or you might be reading a rom-com. And that's where I mean, you don't necessarily narrate the genre because characters don't know they're in a horror book. They don't know they're in a rom-com. They're just living out this experience in that moment. But there is a tone that you set in different genres. And I think of that. I've actually said the same thing. I was like, I wouldn't play Mozart the same way that I would play John Cage, like, I
Yeah.
wouldn't, or Bruckner is not the same as Haydn, and so, that's how I think of in terms of literary genre. Mhm,
That is fascinating. Um, and I'm even I'm hearkening back to the thing you just said. I'm even inspired by the way you were able to bring the basso into your voice for the trombone and bring the nasal in for the oboe.
mhm.
Um, because of course that is something we do also on our instruments to like
Yes, yes.
bring it back. Like absolutely, I play differently if I'm shadowing a flute
Mhm,
versus if I am ghosting over a cello section versus if I am playing an oboe solo.
mhm, mhm, absolutely, and, what was it? You just said something that I lit a bell in my rang a bell in my head, and now it's escaping me now. Hopefully, it will come back. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, what I love too about these musical metaphors. For example, let me talk about if I'm seeing a certain character as a trombone, right? I have that sound. I have that sound profile in my ear, right?
Hmm.
But also, then you can also then take it even further because a trombone player can play different music differently and it's going to approach different, it's there's so many layers that you can then play with to make these characters so much more specific when you need to.
Of course. Because a trombone can be like the drunken cowboy in
Hmm.
rodeo and can
Hmm.
also be the nobility of
Yes,
Brahms.
absolutely.
Oh, amazing. Um, which strikes me also that fooling around with my friends or family, like I might uh, feign a British accent or feign a French accent, but like I can't maintain it and be a character in it. I can, pronounce three words and get a laugh. But this idea of being able to characterize into something like and understand so well, the voice of
Hmm.
a trumpet, the voice of like
Right.
it's really lovely.
Right, right. And I'm sure and every narrator has their tools for the way that they do this. For example, it makes more sense for me and it makes it easier to shift in when thinking about a different instrument. Whereas somebody who's vocally trained is going to think about, am I in my chest? Am I in my head voice? Am I in where am I in the back of my mouth? Am I forward in my mouth? They're thinking about those things. For me, that's very like technical and physical. And I think even as a musician, it was always easier and more organic for me to think coming from how do I want it to sound rather than what do I need to do to make it sound that way. I only go there if I'm having trouble with or I'm trying to imitate somebody. Okay, what are they doing to sound that way? So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, I mean this is fantastic. I feel like I could talk to you all day about like this exact topic, the because it's fascinating for me to hear someone who is expert in their craft um talk about what that's like.
yeah.
But let me like take a step backward in your story and ask about this transitional period because like surely it was not that you leaped from being at the top of your game in the San Francisco Symphony to being like an expert audiobook narrator. Um, can
Well,
you
first of
talk
all,
about
I am definitely not an expert audiobook narrator by any means. I'm still very new by industry standards, um but yeah, but it's going well. Yeah, and leap, wow, more like crashed. It was quite a transition, and there was a definite dark period that
Mhm,
started before I left the orchestra, obviously. I was
mhm,
struggling for a while,
yeah,
and anyone who's suffered from any kind of playing difficulties knows how lonely that can be and how scary it is and how just I mean, playing in an orchestra at that level is already anxiety inducing enough. But for things not to be firing, that used to be just things that you didn't have to think about at all. Um, it's a different kind of it's a different level of hell. And so by the time I did get the diagnosis, the final I finally I went through 3 neurologists, finally ending up with Dr. Stephen Frucht, who's like, one of the biggest names in diagnosis. Um, by the time I finally got that definitive diagnosis, I was so relieved, because I literally didn't know what I would have done if it wasn't dystonia, if it wasn't something that I knew there really wasn't any coming back from. Um, because then I've been for 3 years now at that point. I'd been struggling and trying to fix things and reaching out to old teachers and nothing was working. Not only was
yeah,
nothing working, it was getting worse the more I
yeah,
worked on it.
yeah,
So, just getting diagnosed was at that point such an immense relief. And for the first, I would say the first few months after putting my horn away that last time, after that final concert, I felt so free. Um, I had great benefits, obviously, because I retired from a top level orchestra where we had really good benefits and long term disability insurance, etc. but I felt so free, just to not have to have that weight on my heart anymore, and not just be live every day in fear of not being able to do what I needed to do and being exposed. God, you feel so vulnerable, and you're just so in fear of exposure. And finally, it was out there. I told my colleagues, I told the music director, I put in the paperwork, I put the horn away, and I left. I had a wonderful summer. My husband and I traveled. And by the time I got the diagnosis, we also had been talking about, what do we do if this is in fact what this is?
Right. If this is a
And I'm not,
career-ending
yes,
situation, as opposed to something that, like, if I just work harder, maybe I can struggle my way out of this struggle,
right,
which,
exactly.
doesn't feel better,
No,
actually.
no,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel better because, especially if you've been struggling for as long as I had at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah.
So we already kind of knew, once I got the diagnosis, we had kind of decided, like, we're not going to stay in the Bay Area. We're going to move closer to family. I had just had my first child, and, she wasn't even 1 year old yet. Um, so, and, God, any mom,
Yeah.
any parent knows, like, that first year is already, like, it was such a tremendous year in so many ways, for good and for bad. So yeah, we knew we were gonna leave. We were gonna move. We were gonna move back to the East Coast, where my husband and my family are all on the East Coast. Um, and that felt so freeing. But then by the time we did kind of do this whole, like, hang out in the Bay Area and have our goodbyes with our friends, and then we traveled. We went to Italy for a month, and just traveled around. And then we landed in Long Island, and we lived at my in-laws' house for about 3 months while we fixed up the house that we now live in. And that was when it was winter, cold. That was when it really started to hit hard. And yeah, I found a therapist. I got back on meds, and
Mhm.
I was in a deep depression, and I was just doing what I could do to get through each day. Um, and at the same time, trying to stay grateful that I had climbed that mountain and reached the pinnacle, so that it could at least I was able to be set up for this next phase financially. Um,
Yeah.
and and I could take my time finding what that next thing was going to be. But in the meantime, I can enjoy the small years with my daughter, and then got pregnant again and had my second daughter. I could enjoy that, and I could be there for that in a way that I never would have been able to do had I still been playing. We all know what the lifestyle is like, what the hours are like. It's I look back on it, and I don't miss it at all. I miss those big moments, being in the middle of a
Yeah.
Strauss tone poem or a Mahler symphony. I miss that for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but we also know that those are few and far between, and it seems like the industry is moving to a place where it's even, there's even less of that. Those are expensive productions, and people are doing movie soundtracks instead. So, um, and then after a while, there was the point where I was like, okay, the kids are starting to be a little bit less, I'm not wearing them anymore.
Yes.
And what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do for me? What's the next step? I explored a couple things. I took an online interior design course, and I like pretty spaces, but I realized pretty quickly that that's about all it is. I like to admire other people's design of pretty spaces, and it's not so much what I wanted to be doing. I'm a baker. I started making cakes and decorating cakes for people. And I worked in an artisan chocolate shop for a while.
Ooh.
And I learned how to make, like, these beautiful filled bonbons. And all of these things were fun. And again, I was employing some of these skills, but ultimately I just knew that that wasn't what it was that I wanted to be doing with my time. And then fast forward to a conversation that I had with another ex-musician, a violinist named Rebecca Stern, who is also now a narrator. And she and I met when I was in Dallas. I was third horn in Dallas Symphony, and she was playing violin with the Fort Worth Symphony. And she put the violin away for similar reasons. It was just too painful. She had shoulder issues, physical issues, just recurring injury. And she was starting to get into this narration thing, and we were catching up as we would every few years, she and I. And she just said, "Well, what are you gonna do?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'm baking cakes. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Haven't figured it out yet." She's like, "Well, this is what I'm doing, and I think you'd be really good at it. So if you ever want to talk about it, if you ever want to talk about how you might explore this a little bit, give me a call. No pressure. Just let me know."
Hmm.
So a year later, I was even more so in a space where I was like, I think I want to do something performative. I've always had a little bit of an actor bug. I asked my kids my parents when I was a little kid if they would get me an agent so I could be an actor. Um, and so I thought about it and I was like, that seems like it would work. It's something you can do from home. That's where the industry is at this point. Very few people are really going into studio on a regular basis and recording audiobooks. We all set up studios at home, and I can do it on my schedule. I can do as much or as little as I want to. Um, I'm now a member of SAG-AFTRA, and I'm very close to qualifying for health insurance through SAG-AFTRA, which is a huge expense now that we're not getting it from the orchestra anymore.
Of course,
So
yes.
it just ticked so many boxes, and I get to perform, you know?
Yeah. That's
So
that's wonderful. Like, thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably this journey that you had to be on. Like, I sort of can't imagine. It's every musician's nightmare to, like, suddenly not be able to do the thing that we have trained and trained and trained and, like, loved and loved and loved.
and you literally can't see anything else. Like you have to have you. The reason musicians are successful is because they put those blinders on.
Yes.
They don't consider anything else. You have to be single-mindedly focused on that one thing in order to have a real chance of succeeding at it. So
Mhm.
it was really impossible to see any other way forward.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, absolutely. I
which brings us full circle because the skills that we develop as musicians are always, always applicable to whatever else it is that you set your mind to.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So so, may I ask about then your first couple of audiobook experiences? Like, what did it feel like to be an experienced performer but a newbie in this space? What like what did that journey feel like?
Um, yeah, that's an interesting question that I have to let's go back in time. I think my first audiobook was actually a volunteer, non-paid gig I did for an organization called Learning Ally. And they are an organization that produces tools and resources, but also audiobooks for children who have reading delays and learning disabilities and dyslexia. And audiobooks have become a really helpful tool for those kids. So a lot of narrators will start out by volunteering their time to narrate books for this organization. So those were my first couple of books actually. Um and I don't know, I think that I think there's a certain amount of imposter syndrome that a lot of us struggle with. What I certainly did as a musician, even when I was playing really well in
Mhm.
San Francisco and things were still going really well for me, I still had this feeling of like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, why do people think I know what I'm doing? And why are they asking me to do these master classes? I'm just, and a certain amount of like, fake it till you make it. Like, I guess I had made it, but there was always a certain amount of like, winging it. I guess
Mhm.
we'll just do the thing, depend on my practice and depend on my training and just get out there and just feel the fear and do it anyway.
I mean, will you say that again louder for the people in the back? Because
Yeah, right. But the
right?
good I will say that the saving grace and what's still just a comfort to me is that it is something that you do in private. For better or for worse. It is a lonely job where I'm in this little room and I
Mhm.
don't work with other people in most cases. That is something that I like more about this than live performance, for example, because I do get
Mm.
to redo it. If I read a sentence and I don't like the way it landed, I can go back and do it again. And so what I'm putting out into the world is exactly how I want it. Whereas live
Oh.
performance, it's like, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to do this and it's going to come out the way it comes out and it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be what I was feeling in the moment.
Yes. This is live music, we always say to ourselves as we, like, stumble in defeat off of the stage
Yeah.
after a rough one, but, like, the idea that you can just release the best moments of your practice session is
It
kind of
is,
lovely.
it's very lovely. Yeah, yeah. And sometimes when I think about, even when I think back on my music career, sometimes I think about, at one point in college, I was sitting in some movie that had some amazing soundtrack, and I was like, maybe I should just go to LA and be a studio musician. And, because then it's just recording. You're not on stage wearing your black. You're not, the lights aren't on you. You're going to, I mean, hopefully. And I was always a good sight reader too. So it's like,
Also,
that's great. I would just get it in the first pass and we keep it moving, right? Whereas
right,
as an
certainly no
orchestral
stress in
musician,
a Hollywood recording studio.
well, yeah, certainly no stress there. But again, like once you've got it down, you don't have to keep doing it 4 nights in I can't imagine. I have to be speaking to the choir when I say, like, you nail that solo night number 1 and you're like, "Oh, thank God." But then you're like, "Wait, I gotta do that 3 more times." You know? And
Mhm.
there's none of that in recording. You're like, once you get it, you're done. You keep it moving. It's nice. It's a relief. It's refreshing and freeing.
Amazing. Amazing. Nicole, you are so inspiring. I love this conversation. Everything about it is interesting. I could talk all day, but I cannot actually talk all day. Is there something that you would like to share with the people that I haven't made space for in this conversation?
I don't know. Like I don't even really, your listeners are generally musicians. Are they people who are trying to transition to other fields? Are they trying to just
Maybe.
find a little more fulfillment in within their musical career? I don't know.
Maybe.
Um I guess I just, one thing that a coach of mine said that was immensely helpful, because I had gotten to a place where I knew just enough about narrating and about the craft of narrating to know how much I didn't know. And I started getting a little tight and I started getting a little anxious around it. Like, I want to get better. I want to be able to do this. And she was like, and I can hear that. And I want you to just remember to just play. Just play around with it. Have fun. And and that was really important for me to hear, because again, as a musician, the last few years of my career, I was not playing. It was not fun anymore. It was hard work. And I remembered what I tried to get myself back to that place of what it was like to be feeling good and sounding good and able to do the things that I wanted to do, and be able to be spontaneous and connected and in the moment. And I am able to bring that to my narration now. And I would remind musicians to always remember to do that with their craft as well.
Yes. Yes, that is beautiful. Thank you so much. Where would you like people to follow you? Where would you like people
Oh,
to? I'll put your links in the chat
oh,
in the
thank you.
show notes.
Yeah.
But
I definitely keep my Instagram updated and my Facebook updated. So on Instagram, I am Nicole Cash Chronicles. And that's also my website, NicoleCashChronicles.com. And on Facebook, I didn't make a professional Facebook. I'm just Nicole Cash, and Sachs is my husband's name. I actually never took it, but Nicole Cash Sachs is my Facebook. But yeah, Nicole Cash Chronicles, NicoleCashChronicles.com. And if you have a good ear, you might hear my pseudonym as well if you're listening to books. But I'm not gonna divulge that secret here.
excellent. Okay, Nicole Cash, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
I'm glad.